Welcome to our webinar. We are going to be talking about unlocking the power of data to advance circular economy. I'm Trishna, the Senior Growth Marketer at Circularise, and I'll be moderating today's panel discussion. While we're waiting for more attendees to join in, please continue adding in where y'all are from today. Hi. Okay, I think we can start. We have quite a few people already joining us. So again, hello. It's wonderful to see such a diverse audience joining us today. So thank you for joining in. We're here today because data isn't just information, it's the key enabler of circular economy. It helps companies comply with regulations, measure performance, manage internal reporting, and make informed strategic decisions. Yet, as vital as data is, many businesses still struggle with fragmented definitions, a lack of interoperable infrastructures, and challenges of secure data sharing. So today's expert panel will dive into these issues, share insights from recent white paper of theirs, which is called the Circularity Data Exchange, the landscape analysis and way forward, and discuss actionable steps businesses can take right now. Joining me today are Lorna. She's an associate for circular products and material at WBCSD. We have Phil Brown, who's head of sustainable innovation at Circularise, and Aline. She's a senior consultant at KPMG. Throughout our conversation, please feel free to submit your questions at any time using the questions tab located at the bottom of your screen. We highly encourage you to participate and give your insights, and curiosity will enrich our discussion. Okay, so now without further delay, let's kick off our conversation. Lorna, I'd like to start with you. To set the stage, could you briefly introduce the key findings from the white paper and tell us why addressing Circularity Data Exchange is so critical right now, and the value of this collaborative effort has brought? But before, Lorna, you start, I would like to just set the agenda as well, which we will be covering a few topics during the panel discussion, which is the landscape, the key challenges, real-world applications, and the future. And yes, Lorna, over to you.
Sweet. Thank you, Trishna. Can I just check that you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, amazing. Thank you. Yeah, and thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today. As Trishna said, my name is Lorna van Doorne. I work at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, WBCSD, as a Circular Products and Materials Associate. And in my role, I lead a work stream on Circularity Data Exchange, which is very fitting for today's conversation. At the Circularity Data Exchange, CDX for short, we seek to enable the exchange of consistent, comparable, and credible circularity data down at the product level across global value chains. And for those of you who haven't perhaps yet been introduced to WBCSD, we are a membership-based organization that bring together over 230 of the world's leading organizations to transform the way that we work for a better future. So we work across areas such as action to limit the climate crisis, restore nature, as well as then tackle inequality. But answering your question, I think first and foremost, data plays a significant role in the transition towards and the operation of the circular economy. So it's key to understanding not only the composition and fate of our products and materials in theory, but also in practice. And you already touched upon a few of the reasons why this data is so necessary. But yeah, from a business perspective, there's of course regulatory compliance, being able to align with emerging policies that mandate transparency on reporting circularity data. There's performance measurement, essentially being able to assess, being able to access this consistent and comparable data to benchmark and monitor your circularity metrics over time, as well as then inform your internal target setting. You have then internal reporting, of course, so communicating the circularity through your sustainability reports, enhancing your stakeholder communication. And then, as you mentioned, decision making. So with these numbers, they reveal insights into the life of your products and materials, and it can help to identify these levers of change to inform how and where you might want to act on those insights. From a more systems perspective, let's say, this data is really essential to keep products and materials in circulation at their highest value for as long as possible, which is essentially the theory behind a circular economy, right? So this information could allow, for example, a plastic item, let's take a child's toy, to receive proper end-of-life care, possibly allowing it to enter a second life as a toy again, or possibly enter a new value chain like the automotive sector, serving as a cup holder in the interior of a car. So in light of this significance, as well as the strides that are being made at a global level to enable data exchange, this white paper essentially served as, well, it was the result of a scoping exercise. And that scoping exercise we did together with KPMG and Circularise, which explored where WBCSD's value add into this space can be. So we did a landscape on the current data exchange initiatives, the regulations that exist, as well as extracted some best practices. I'm happy to just take a couple minutes to just quickly highlight a few findings from that report, if that's all right. So when it comes to defining and measuring circularity, of the 33 global regulations and voluntary frameworks that we assessed, we found that the type of data being predominantly requested for falls under only 3 data categories. And what we mean by data categories is like these themed buckets of data. And those 3 themes were reuse and recycling information, materials and chemical composition, and then environmental information. And so while this isn't per se the end of the world, we did identify 14 data categories, and they will all prove essential in enabling the circular economy one way or another, depending on the value chain actor who needs that data. Another insight that came from the paper, yeah, if we could just jump to the next slide, that'd be great, is the fragmentation that does exist on how circularity data is defined. And not only that, but the data points that speak to that definition. And then alongside that, of the several initiatives that we explored that are already exchanging the circularity data, we saw that there's a lack of interoperable infrastructure such that those systems are not able to communicate and exchange data across to each other. And let me not give the wrong impression here. It's not only doom and gloom. There were also several best practices that we were able to reflect on and that we can extract learnings from to possibly apply in the context of circularity. So one of them being PACT, the Partnership for Carbon Transparency. Essentially, they help companies address transparency in their scope 3 emissions. And there are learnings there that we could possibly apply to the context of circularity. So this collaboration with Circularise and KPMG really helped to inform us of where WBCSD stands in this space and how we could positively use our convening power to support the acceleration of global circularity product data sharing. I don't know if Phil or Aline, you want to jump in and compliment there on that collaboration.
Yeah, thanks, Lorna. And just from our side, I think obviously Circularise, just to give anyone in the audience a bit of an overview, we are a data system provider. So we're building the systems to try and do the data transfer across the value chain, hence the name Circularise. We're trying to provide and make sure that at any point within the value chain, the correct data is available to do, as Lorna said, to take plastic from one application, ergo a toy, into a car and provide consumers as well as businesses the relevant data that allows everyone to validate and fact check that. So for us, this is really a foundational piece within the wider how to deliver upon an enabling circular economy. And as Lorna also said, making it functional for everyone. Now, my big lens here as well is, as we are with people from the public, the aim is to make sure that that data is validated and attested to. And this is also where I'll tee in Aline, because working for KPMG, this is the group that, or one of the groups that also wants to make sure and validate that the data is correct So Aline, over to you on anything else to add.
Yeah, thank you, Phil and Lonne. Eline, I'm from KPMG, and we did this project together with Lonne, with Phil, and I think it was very valuable because we, of course, help clients on the one hand with a consultancy, so advise them on problems or things that they have related to circular economy, but indeed on the other hand also assurance and audit on ESG topics as well. So I think what we discovered during this exercise is that it is still a challenge, and the data is very important, and that we should just start with trying to get this data and making sure that the data that we report for compliance is accurate, and also able to share it across the value chain. So very happy with all these insights that we have generated.
That's great. So then I have a question now for Lonne. In the white paper, the circular economy currently represents 6.9%. I think in the paper it was another number, but so it's reduced, and of the global economy. Could you share your thoughts on why the progress has been slow despite the clear benefits?
Yeah, of course. You're right in saying that when the paper came out, we had a different figure mentioned than the economy's current circularity levels. But it's tragic, really. The 6.9 that you mentioned comes from Circular Economy's 2025 Circularity Gap Report, which essentially serves as this assessment of the current state of global circularity. And it helps to reveal the gaps and the urgent need for coordinated action from governments and businesses and civil society to essentially transition towards a more sustainable and circular economy. So that 6.9% means that only 6.9% of the materials that are entering the economy are secondary. And why I suggested that it was tragic is because last year the economy was 7.2% circular. And when the first Circularity Gap Report came out, which is in 2018, the globe was at that point 9.1% circular. So the trend that we are seeing is unfortunately a downwards one. And there are a few reasons for why we're seeing this. The main one being the overall material use growth is being sustained over time, and it's outpacing our growth of secondary material use. And so in other words, what that means is while the absolute amount of secondary materials might slowly be increasing, it's not yet enough to offset the rapid rise in overall material consumption, which we make up for by extracting raw materials. And then we also end up producing more waste than our systems can effectively handle. And then that's also then why we will see recycling rates decreasing as well. And keep in mind that this is really important because also 55% of global greenhouse gas emissions are related to raw material extraction and processing. So it's a huge impact when we increase that raw material extraction. I just want to build on this for a second and maybe speak more to opportunity, because yes, that number has been declining in the last couple of years, but there is also a great opportunity that we can move into here. So in partnership with the UNEP's One Planet Network, at WBCSD, we're developing a global circularity protocol for business, which will essentially serve as a go-to framework to help guide companies in their target setting, their measuring, reporting and disclosing of circularity and resource efficiency. And it's important to note that the Global Circularity Protocol will cover not only the technosphere, but also the biosphere, and really recognizes the importance of Global South consideration in making circularity a global success. And last year, the reason I mention this is because last year we essentially conducted this impact analysis of how this framework could really benefit in supporting that transition and the implementation of a circular economy. And there are a few numbers that came out that really speak to the impact. So we could look at reducing our material consumption by 4 to 5% annually in the next 25 years by accelerating the decoupling of economic activity from resource consumption. We also found that greenhouse gas emissions could decrease between 6 to 7% over the same period, which is equivalent to 67 to 76 gigatons of CO2 equivalent savings. And the last statistic I'll share, and I promise it'll be the last one, is that we can also decrease air pollution by 11 to 12% per year. And there are several statistics, but let me not go on. Essentially, I just wanted to highlight that, yes, this number and this trend is downward, but there is a real opportunity here. There are a lot of moving elements that will need to play in sync to systemically transform our economy, but the opportunity is here and the opportunity is big, and so are its benefits.
And how about the role of regulations like EU, ESPR, CSRD in driving circularity?
Yes. So it's good that you mentioned those. Those ones have been, I think, on the tip of many people's tongues in the business space. So the ESPR and the CSRD, they're not only compliance mechanisms, they're also catalysts for making Circularity Data Exchange both necessary as well as actionable. So let me start with the ESPR. I also don't want to spend too much of the start of this call talking by myself. So how about I just introduce these regulations, and I'm happy to pass on to my colleagues. Essentially, the ESPR, which stands for the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, it entered into force in July last year, in 2024. And essentially, it aims to improve the sustainability of products that are entering the EU market. It enables a setting of performance and information requirements, which are known as eco-design requirements for these goods. And these include circularity aspects, these include energy performance, recyclability, durability, amongst a long list of others. So the regulation uniquely introduces a digital product passport, a DPP. It's been a bit of a buzz term recently. And for those of you who don't know what a DPP is, essentially a DPP serves as this digital identity card for products, materials, and components. And it will make it easier to help to store and access information relevant to the actors who require the information. So the passport will thus help provide information on a product level relevant to the actor for informed decision-making related to sustainability or compliance, supply chain management, and generally driving the circular economy. On the other hand, then we have the CSRD, as you mentioned, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And this regulation, or this directive rather, it broadens the scope a bit, and it mandates sustainability reporting for companies that includes resource use, material waste, and impact data. So while ESPR was very product specific, the CSRD brings circularity essentially to the boardroom, and it ties business performance to environmental data, including how a company's operations look. So alignment between this product level and this corporate level data is then really essential for scaling circularity and embedding that at home. I think it's also worth here, in light of these regulations that we bring up, to possibly touch on the omnibus proposal. Essentially, this package of proposed changes by the EU serve to reduce the reporting burden on companies. I know that there's a lot of uncertainty in the air due to the reining in of these data requirements, but I also think that it's important to recognize this data will be needed for the circular economy in any case. So I don't know if I could just turn to my colleagues there and see if there's anything that they want to comment on. Perhaps KPMG or Circularise want to build on that omnibus piece?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Lana. Yeah, so what we have seen with the omnibus, because at KPMG we've helped a lot of clients, especially in the last couple of years, with their regulatory requirements on CSRD. And with this omnibus, was the threshold of being CSRD compliant was, much before omnibus was, of course, a huge scope of companies that needed to report on CSRD, both listed companies, but also smaller companies. And especially for the smaller companies, it created, and kind of also, a burden in that way that it costs a lot of money to get that data ready. And with this omnibus, what we see, of course, listed companies are still compliant and they are continuing their work on CSRD. But what we well, what we would expect is that then the smaller companies that are not maybe compliant anymore would then just stop doing it. But that's not the trend that we're seeing, because yeah, of course, with the scope 3 and everything that happens in the value chain, and also what we're discussing here with circularity, is that yeah, also those companies also need to have that data ready to provide that data to maybe the companies that are CSRD compliant. And that there's also, of course, a competitive advantage in having that circularity data, in this case, ready. So yeah, the EU is reducing maybe the scope of people or of companies that need to comply, but yeah, we do not really see the trend, luckily, that people do not pay attention to circularity or the broader sustainability topic, but it's maybe more focused on how can we improve circularity rather than only report on it. But Phil, I don't know if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, I think, and thank you for both of that. So not to make this an omnibus presentation, but in itself, the omnibus process just shows the challenge around collecting, transferring data along a value chain. So the aim is for simplification. Again, building on what Aline and Lorna has said, we're not seeing as a tech company a disproportionate trend away from collecting data related to this because of all the other utilization that it can have and support for operations, et cetera, and business cases Aline mentioned. It has created, from a decision framework, maybe a little bit of a delay for some companies, and they've maybe refocused. Actually, what we've been seeing, as Lorna mentioned as well, is refocusing attention from just reporting and getting this into, okay, how do we start to collect this? And I think just to sort of tagline this and finish on this conversation, I would say even when regulations change, and we're seeing this also globally, the criteria for collecting data doesn't. And this actually, I can't state who has said this, but this actually came from a WBCSD delegation meeting, which operates under Chatham House. But I think that's the key message that needs to be transferred. Yes, regulations are changing, they're becoming more simplified. This is also a process of the EU listening to challenges and frustrations, let's say. There are arguments about how they've brought this through, but the general direction of travel is that this is not going to go away. And yeah, it's just one of these key challenges. How can companies across a value chain at different levels of maturity still operate and work under the same rules? So I think, Trishna, I think that's wrapping that part up, because we've got a lot to discuss also in the remainder.
Yeah. So moving on from this particular section, I want to now talk about, identifying the key challenges and what the current work is to overcome them in exchanging circularity data. So let's start with you, Phil, in relation to tech-driven solutions. How could you share some key technical barriers companies face in securing circularity data?
Yeah, so I'll discuss this across 3 topics, and they're not all necessarily technical. So first one topic being the misunderstanding of confidentiality. Second being fragmented data exchange infrastructure. So that is more of a technical. And then I'll lead with the end, where is technical development going and the future operations that could be brought to market. So if I go back to topic 1, misunderstanding confidentiality. Our modus operandi and our traditional default has been for secrecy. Across value chains, there's a lot of IP, intellectual property. There's a lot of sensitive information. Our default has commonly been to protect that, which has made sense. But this creates a defensive position. And in a circular economy, just as materials and energy needs to flow, data that is attributed to that needs to flow as well. And so this default, when it's strictly not necessary, needs to be changed. So I term this as a mindset change. Also, though, in value chain processes, especially when my data is the aggregation of my suppliers' information, there is questions around the ownership and potential confusion of that, and what we would call middle party protection. When I am sent data, can I actually share this downstream? To what level? Do I have to report on it? So this is where we're going, and it creates some of these what I call contractual legal gray zones. And this is not just between companies, this is also increasingly looking at a geopolitical lens as well. Where is data hosted? Where is it going? So I would wrap up on that for sake of time by saying mindsets need to shift, because the technological solutions are being developed, but it's also humans interface with technology. So we also need to change how we work with this. Just before I move over to the fragmented data exchange as well, because that's more of the topic, just like to invite Elaine and Lorna if there's anything else you would say about misunderstanding of confidentiality, any point, and if not, I can move to the second.
You can move.
Move to the second.
Cool. So if we look at fragmented data exchange, what we find is we have siloed systems. Again, this is partly connected to the historical lens of protecting our data. Now, what I also mean, silos can be within organizations. So as companies purchase and acquire other companies, which happens quite regularly, and or they just have different business units, different manufacturing sites, their data isn't really connected or used. Now, that, when it's done along a value chain, gets extrapolated way further. And I alluded to and said before about the jurisdictional friction. So where is data hosted? This is becoming a concern for countries. And some of the regulations in on themselves are trying to also democratize the data, also to the access of consumers. So where is the data coming from? Who owns it? These sort of aspects. And then we also end up into some sector-specific dead ends where, for instance, I'll give an example within automotive in Europe versus Japan. So in Europe, we have initiatives around Catena X, which we've referenced in the report. But there's also sister groups such as Oranos, which is based in Japan. And now there are many popping up everywhere else. So yes, these are regional, but they're also creating bigger and bigger silos. Not saying that we've solved these yet, but these are just where the work is in progress. Now, if I take to the next point that I was referencing as well, which is where is technology going? Where are we making progress? Because as I say, technology is being developed. We are seeing, and this is essentially some use of AI, so early use of AI, that's the big buzzword right now. But the problem is collecting data, structuring data, and harmonizing it, and potentially augmenting where there are data gaps. So this is something that we're seeing a very fast change within the market, and lots going to be coming in the next couple of years. But the other point here is about utilizing this to generate usable answers. Because again, why do we transfer data along a value chain? It's not because everybody's a tech boffin and wants to just put their glasses on and read through a massive spreadsheet. It's that they want answers to something. So making that data actionable and usable. Now, this is where I'm also going to promote a little bit what Circularise does with data. Here we combine what's known as zero knowledge proof. So zero knowledge proof in the simplest sense, if I'm 18 and I want to purchase an alcoholic beverage in Europe or commonly across these areas, I need to prove that I'm 18. Traditionally, I show my driver's license. That has a lot of information on it. But actually, the person selling me the alcohol just wants to know, am I 18 or over? Now, because I've got a lot of gray in my beard, they could probably make an assessment now that I'm over 18, but they still need to check it. So I just want to give them the answer. What Circularise does is it does this for information around materials. This gets around some of the challenges around confidentiality, because if using Lorna's example of the plastic that used to be a toy that went into a car, if I want to prove that this used to be a toy, but now it's a car or cup holder, then I need to be able to just simply say, this is the correct answer. Yes, this is valid. Now, this is also where we need partners like Aline and the KPMG team to also validate and test and approve that that is correct. But what this does is it flips the model on the head. What we're now doing is I would create a discussion of selective transparency. Who needs to know what, where, why, and when? And are they a valid actor? So this is what we're doing under cryptography using the zero knowledge proof on a blockchain system, but then this allows for secure data transfer that is auditable. So again, you as a consumer, when you get this, you know that it is the correct data. Now, I'm going to very quickly move to a future lens because I've talked AI, I've talked blockchain. Then if we start to bring in autonomous AI agents, which are programs that are built on top of an AI system that link to data sets that can actually create automatic decision logic. So this means that we can remove a lot of the human error potentially, but we still need to make sure that third parties, again, in the case here with Lean and KPMG, can attest to this and also even approve or validate the AI automation logic. So this creates this distributed ledger, but providing a trust layer, and it would allow for potentially scaling some of these challenges. Now, that is a future result, so it's not there yet. But before I close on this section, I'd just like to ask Aline or Lorna if there's anything you'd want to add there from your lens, and then I'll just quickly close this, and then we can continue. Aline, Lorna, to yourselves.
I think maybe thank you, Phil. The only part that I would add is how vital here cross-sector collaboration is, and a few of those initiatives, especially that you mentioned, and deviating away from working in silos. And maybe just to share, in a recent conversation that I had with a WBCSD member in the electronics sector, just to really make this tangible for everyone, is they were explaining how they might have up to 10,000 suppliers across their tiers in which they need to communicate with in order to collect this data for sharing it in such systems. And so it really speaks to the collective involvement that's needed to enable the movement of this information in a way that does work for us all.
Yeah, and I think maybe to build further on that is that what we have also seen, I think, in the white paper that we have created is, and Lonna already shared it in the beginning, is that there are so many data categories or metrics is how we can measure circularity or topics related to circularity. And I think this is, of course, also, I think, related to what you are saying, Phil, is that if you have these large data sets based on product circularity data, you also need to make sure that this data is, on the one hand, the data quality is of course correct, but you are also need to be able to compare it. So we also should start working on sector agnostic data categories, that can then maybe measure the same thing across sectors. But what we, I think, also have seen in the white paper is that we're not there yet. Unfortunately, but that is also something that we really need to keep in mind. It's not the similar as GHG emissions, that just one concept or one term, easy to compare, and that's unfortunately not the case with circularity. So maybe that's the only thing I wanted to add.
Thank you for both of those additions. And so just to summarize on this part, what I would say is it's around reframing risk, clarifying the rights of data, who has the right to share what, building this interoperability layer, but also really understanding the responsibilities and the mindset around sharing data. I mean, just to sort of say it, we don't want to have death by spreadsheet. So we're not talking about just exchanging information in spreadsheets, which has been the traditional method of sharing information. We're really trying to build the architecture to create a circular economy business flow and linking that to the data that's attributed to it. And seeing as I just use a very specific keyword on the business flow, the financial impacts, I'd like to tee back to Aline, because I know you've been doing a lot of work with your customers and clients around understanding the business implications and the financial implications. So Aline, over to you for that.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. I would like to talk a bit more about the challenges in the financial incentive on investing in circular data exchange infrastructure. Because what we have seen in the white paper, but also at our clients, is that many companies still perceive these investments in circular data infrastructure as primarily as a cost and not as strategic investments. That's on the one hand due because the return on investment is not yet clear. So the benefits of collecting this data, but also sharing this data across the value chain, is often very indirect. It's long-term, and it's also hard to quantify. And especially for these smaller companies, which I already talked about, there's no direct benefit of getting that data if you're not compliant, for example, to regulations. So why should you invest then in a data infrastructure? On the other hand, there's also this fragmented value capture. So the benefits of collecting circularity data and sharing this is unevenly distributed along the value chain. For example, what you see is that upstream actors such as manufacturers or suppliers, they are often responsible and also taking this responsibility for collecting data, most of the time to comply with regulations. Lonna already touched upon the digital product passports. If these companies need to collect this data, they may not directly benefit from this, especially when they do not have the control over the entire life cycle of the product, and especially at the end of the life cycle. Meanwhile, the downstream actors, the recyclers, but also the consumers, they benefit from product information, such as the repairability or material composition. I'm of course, also a consumer, if I buy a phone, for example, yeah, I would like to know how to repair it and where I can repair my phone, rather than maybe buy a new one. But I do not really contribute to this data collection, and I do not really pay for this data collection, while the supplier or the manufacturer, they are paying for this. So this really creates this misalignment of incentives, and therefore also slows down this investment in data infrastructure and also the adoption of this data infrastructure. And then lastly, there's also a bit of a chicken and an egg dilemma, of course, where companies hesitate to invest in without clear returns, but without these investments, yeah, these benefits will not materialize. But of course, we also see a shift happening. So there's also some positive shift happening. Because what we see is that we have at KPMG as well work a lot with big tech players, and we really see that they're investing in circularity data infrastructure, which really signals that there is a long-term value creation. The only challenge at the moment, which I hope to solve, which will be solved in the near future, is that these technologies might not be accessible for all due to that the cost of implementation is relatively high. What we also see is the upcoming legislation, of course, especially by the EU, that really shows the importance of getting that product circularity data. We see with the ESPR that mandates the creation of these digital product passports, which requires companies really to collect and also share product circularity data. This shifts then the conversation in, should we invest more to how do we comply efficiently? And as Phil already mentioned, you can of course also do this manually in an Excel every time for each product. But if you're, for example, investing in tooling that creates these digital product passports automatically, it can lead to long-term efficiency and also scalability. And then lastly, the supply chain transparency is becoming a competitive advantage, especially if you look into in light of the geopolitical issues that we're currently facing in the world. With this, circularity data shouldn't be seen as just one siloed sustainability effort. Of course, it's about repairability, but circularity data is also about where does your material come from, what is it made of, what type of materials are being used, and also how are these materials and products affected by trade restrictions or tariffs. If companies really understand have all this information ready, then that can be a competitive advantage, and also hopefully reduce the cost related to, for example, the tariffs or the trade restrictions. So concluding on this, I think while many companies still see circular data infrastructure as a cost, these regulatory pressure for the ESPR, but also sustainability, supply chain transparency and risk management are really pushing that we're hopefully seeing this more as a strategic investment than rather only as a cost, as something that only costs money. Phil and Lonna, I don't know if you maybe have something to add to this.
I'll just quickly jump in because you mentioned the critical word tariffs right now. And obviously you open up the news and this is essentially what we're hearing coming from the US. So unfortunately can't mention the name of the organization. It's not just actually a single organization, but one specifically had a product coming in to the US market as some of these tariffs came in. Now, some of those tariffs are linked to where is the material smelted? Where is the material from? How many components are from X place? And there's a different economic impact based upon that. Now, this is a type of problem that is based on circularity data, but it's that adjacent use case. So again, this sort of shows if we have these systems in place, some of these challenges that we're facing or companies are facing right now vis-a-vis tariffs can be dealt with. So we've just been talking about the business lens, and I'd like to tee over to Lorna actually around the economic side, highlighting some of that with regulatory incentives. Because we're now in this sort of weird quagmire of regulation, so sticks, which, hit people over the head with, and then we've got carrots. So Lorna, anything to balance and add between the regulatory incentives versus the economic? Over to you.
Sure, there are several regulatory incentives. I mean, especially in the EU, we have the ESPR, right? We have the CSRD and the extended producer responsibility schemes requiring companies to track and provide end-of-life recovery. But perhaps I wonder if, Eileen, if you feel more comfortable taking on this topic. There's a couple of points I want to mention later on, so I just want to make sure I give you the space.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you already touched upon indeed these three important regulations from the EU, and they all focus on different aspects of circularity. So the ESPR really focuses on these digital product passports, on durability, repairability, but the CSRD really mandates you to report on circularity KPIs and how are you going to improve your circular performance as a company. While, for example, the extended producer responsibility scheme really requires companies to track and also provide end-of-life recovery. And these regulations really show a strong, create a strong incentive for companies to really start, on the one hand, investing in getting that data, but also adopting to circular practices, not only for compliance, but also just to remain competitive in this market. The only thing that is happening with these regulations is that if we, for example, take the ESPR, there's also a cost question that comes up. The question is raised more about who's going to pay for this implementation, who is responsible for making this investment. If we look at the DPP, so the digital product passport, if a car company needs to create this digital product passport, it's relatively a small amount for the car to create this, for the company, of course, to create this product passport. But if we look, for example, at more other products such as toys or textiles, the cost of creating this digital product passport is relatively expensive. So who is then going to pay for this? Is it the producer that just takes it up as a cost, or is it maybe the consumer that needs to pay more for this shirt or more for the toy in order to make sure that for the producer it's less of a cost burden. And I think then if we then look at the from economic perspective, at the moment, indirect and direct, there is no single economic incentive yet. But companies can really benefit from having this data available related to circularity. For example, cost savings. So if you know how to more efficiently use your materials, if you are able to reduce certain waste streams or able to better recover your products, that can really save up cost, but also market access. Compliance with these circularity standards is becoming a prerequisite for doing business. If access to capital, if you want to, for example, have a bank or somebody else invest in your company, you do not do anything with circularity, maybe the bank is going to say, hey, you should start investing in this. And this is also linked then to your circularity performance. But I think, and I already touched upon it, we shouldn't view circularity just as a sustainability data. We should really look at it from more of a data multifunctional perspective. So it's crucial to know where your products come from, where they're made of, and also how they move through the value chain. And if you look more from a multifunctional perspective, then this data really supports you in, of course, compliance, but also risk management, also innovation. Are there maybe materials better suited for your product, and also for financial planning? And I think this is really what we should keep in mind with circularity, that it's just multifunctional instead of only this sustainability topic.
I think that's very interesting, Elaine. With now that we've spoken about incentives being in place, Lorna, is there anything you can add about how, if there are any practical examples or any best practices that you've observed where businesses have successfully overcome the data exchange barriers? You're on mute.
There we go. That is exactly what I was checking. Yeah, no, happily. So I think it's really through practical examples that we're able to extract those tangible learnings and really further fuel and empower the ecosystem on how to move forward. So a best practice of data exchange that I'd like to share, which we also included in the landscape analysis, it comes from a WBCSD solution called PACT, which I touched on earlier. It stands for the Partnership for Carbon Transparency, and it helps companies to address their Scope 3 carbon emission data. And the why here is because in this case, Scope 3 carbon emissions, they represent the indirect emissions of a company's value chain. And they can be a significant portion of a company's total greenhouse gas footprint, often amounting to between 70 and 90% of your company's footprint, depending, of course, on the sector. So while Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions are easier to track, Scope 3 emissions are more challenging to measure and report due to their indirect nature and their reliance on external data. So PACT was developed as a global standard for calculating and exchanging consistent, comparable, and credible Scope 3 carbon emission data down to the product level. And it really serves as this enabler of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And this example stands on 3 pillars. The first pillar being a harmonized approach to how Scope 3 carbon emissions are accounted for down at the product level. This open tech infrastructure to enable companies to share this verified primary emission data using a technology provider of their choice, as well as then this network of interoperable solutions for secure peer-to-peer exchange of this data across global value chains, bear in mind. And looking at this from an impact side, you can see that there's over 150 partners in this initiative, over 2,000 companies involved that are exchanging product carbon footprint, and over thousands of product carbon footprints have been exchanged through this solution. So it really speaks to then the impact of being able to come together and work on such a solution. So from this and the learnings that came about through its development and its operation, we're in the process of actually exploring how we might be able to extend this offering to look at something like circularity data in the circularity data workstream that I mentioned I work on earlier. So that would help to facilitate the exchange of information on several of those topics that we have already touched on earlier. So this reporting and disclosure, internal decision making, as well as then digital product passports. But I'm sure that there are also several other initiatives that we can speak to. I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in.
Yeah, I mean, just very briefly, I mentioned them before with the Container X and the automotive and arouse and these other systems as well. What I'd like to do, because I'm also conscious of time, but I'm just going to jump into a bit of a case study that we've been working on. Just for transparency to everyone, we are a member of Container X, but we've also been working with the Global Battery Alliance. I've just been answering a few questions in the chat. Sorry, I haven't got to all of them. One of them is around the most advanced relation for digital product passports. That is in the automotive sector for batteries. The Global Battery Alliance, again, it's in the name, it's an alliance of companies coming together. Circularise has been involved within one of the pilots from 2024. There were 10 pilots. And there's public information on this. Just look for Global Battery Alliance, you'll be able to find it. But just to give a synopsis, the objective was to show how data can be collected across the value chain and presented across different battery producers. So those 10 pilots were looking at different, 5 continents. I think there were 8 jurisdictions. And the pilots was really trying to address the key sustainability metrics, as well as including greenhouse gas emissions, human rights, so due diligence related, such as child labor, slave labor, as well as biodiversity loss. The role that we had within this was really around providing and tracing the material for one of our sets. Unfortunately, not all of that information is public. The key learning from this was that the data collection challenges, while the technology is being developed, not just by ourselves, there were many other technology partners involved in this, the challenge is still actually collecting accurate, comprehensive data. So what Lorna mentioned from the PACT, having a standard framework that everyone can follow, this is still a real moving target at this moment. And then this comes to the interoperability challenge, as well as also the regulatory alignment. So Global Battery Alliance is trying to align with the EU battery regulation, which is mandated as of 2027. So to answer the question from the audience, that 2027 will be the first mandation for a DPP. But the challenge was also not solely a technology challenge. We mentioned this before at the beginning with a mindset shift. It's around the collection, control, and willingness to share the right data at the right time. I think the other areas that we were also trying to work in is this, it's happening not within a vacuum, but we're trying to get down to the granularity data that's really helping compare like for like, so are we comparing apples with apples or apples with oranges? Also, how do we get around some of these risks of sharing and oversharing commercially sensitive information? Now, specifically within the battery sector, because batteries are being developed all the time, their improvement is going, their chemistry is changing. This is very, very sensitive to the battery producers. So these were some of the areas that we tried to work on. Now, this is just one initiative. I'd like to, because I know Aline and the team from KPMG has been working also with WBCSD in a long line on the CTI, the Circular Transition Indicators. So Aline, if you'd like to present us with another framework of activities that's going on.
Yeah, of course. The Circular Transition Indicators, that is I don't know if you know it, but that's a framework that is developed by WBCSD, and we helped as KPMG with creating this framework. And this framework is really something that provides a standardized way to measure circularity both on company level, but also on product level. And this framework helps companies to, on the one hand, understand how circular their material flows are, also identify improvement areas, so where can you be more circular, but also gives metrics, KPIs to track progress. And I think that's also something that Phil just mentioned. Are you comparing apples to apples? If you, for example, use the metrics that have been provided by the CTI, then if many companies use this, then you are comparing apples with apples instead of using a lot of different frameworks and standards. Well, this is a generic CTI framework, so for a sector agnostic. WBCSD has also created, supported by KPMG, sector-specific guidance. So I, for example, helped also with the sector guidance on electronics, because what we have seen is that circularity is also measured differently within across sectors. So you have, for example, in the electronic sectors, electronics modularity is very important, while, for example, in fashion, it's more about fiber blends or recyclability. We have also helped a lot of clients using CTI. We, of course, helped a telecom company on the one hand to assess their circularity of their products, so routers in this case, and on the other hand, also seeing if we could use the metrics that have been provided by CTI to track targets. And good to know is that also these metrics are also aligned with, for example, the CSRD. And this really helped the client to identify how could they optimize their circular performance, but also implementing these KPIs for performance tracking. And I think one main thing is that CTI can really provide a common language for circularity. If a lot of companies are going to use this type of metrics, then you are comparing apples to apples and not apple to pears. The only thing is that the network effect is key. So if CTI, if a lot of companies are using CTI, are adopting this, then only we can compare KPIs and performance, because this circularity topic is such a broad topic, and therefore we also need to make sure that you're comparing the right things. Also looking at the time.
Very conscious of the time. Just if everybody's okay with going like 5 minutes over, but I would like the panelists to quickly touch upon what the future of circularity data looks like and what the actionable next steps could be. For example, Lorna, how will initiatives like GCP and Circularity Data Exchange help standardize circularity data globally?
Sure, thank you, Trishna. Yeah, so the Global Circularity Protocol, which I mentioned earlier, really builds off of this foundation that Aline was just mentioning, the circular transition indicators. And that work really highlights how essential this data is, right? So the GCP will also call on this data exchange mechanism to help its implementation. And this is where the work at the Circularity Data Exchange might be able to support. So this is where we're looking into this methodology and these technical specifications that would be needed to measure and collect this data, but also exchange this information in a credible and consistent manner. And if I could leave the room with anything, I would say just start, right? We really need to be able to get together and work on this. The sectors also need to come together. For instance, if we can bring chemicals and packagings or electronics and mining together, then these groups can co-develop the data models, the standards, the definitions, the governance structures that will allow for this information to flow more freely. There are some resources that exist that can support this. There's two on the screen. One WBCSD publication that we launched a couple months ago to help you with your readiness for the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation, and another one that we had looked at more recently specifically to complement on packaging data. So if I can leave the room with anything, it's to start small, think big, but to start. Phil, do you have anything or Aline to complement? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm also going to use Andreas's question that was in the chat. So thank you, Andreas. It was almost a plant. To everyone in the audience, it's not, but thank you for this. What is the next frontier of circularity data exchange in the value chain? What is not yet done and what needs a solution? More pilots, question mark. So I would really say and hope that we're not in a process of death by pilot. But we are seeing a lot of momentum moving with pilot projects and also coming together. And again, this is really supported by actions that WBCSD are doing and many others. We are seeing these regulatory shifts and we're seeing platforms mature. So really being able to deliver digital product passports and therefore underneath that circular data exchange. But again, there's a risk of fragmentation. And potentially there's a risk of duplication. So yes, I would just really say we don't want death by pilot, but there's still a lot of things that still need to be understood and done. So there still need to be pilots, but in specific areas. So these specific areas, I would say, are around shared architecture, i.e. the rules of the game. So we need to start creating interoperable common layers, not just single platforms that speak to themselves. So really the interoperability challenge. Aline also referenced to it as well, but the business model innovation. So right now, the incentives of data, we need to really crack this nut, because why should companies do all of this? And explore also potentially cost sharing of this data exchange, especially now bringing in SMEs. And I saw in the chat a lot of the questions related to SMEs, particularly repairers, also Global South. So how do we make this a democratized system where everybody can engage and participate? These are still actions that need to be worked upon. And then just from the point of view, and this is also where I'll pass over to Aline as well, because she mentioned the strategic asset of circular data, but we are increasingly seeing this as being relevant and a strategic asset for companies, but it's also getting really to their risk profiling of their business operations. But Aline, I'll pass over to you just to kind of complete on, this is not just ESG and compliance, there's business data and strategic information. What do you have to add?
Yeah, I think it's, thank you, Phil. I think it's, as I think I already mentioned it twice now in this call, I think we should really look not at circular data as just a sustainability topic, but more as a multifunctional data requirement. Because if you know where your products come from, what they're the materials that you have been using in your products, then you're also aware of, for example, your value chain resilience. If you're using critical raw materials that are linked to this, but also the trade and the tariffs that we now see happening in this world. So I think we should really connect to the broader macro trends, so on carbon border taxes, digital product identity, but also the critical raw material strategies. And with this data, having this data ready, it will really will underpin the value chain resilience, secondary sourcing, and also even financing that will be relevant for you through maybe investors or the banks. Phil, I hand it over to you as a final closing remark.
Yeah, so just to everyone in the audience, firstly, thank you so much for staying with us. Also, sorry for the slight overrun, but the questions, I hope we've answered all of them. What I would also lead with, and this is feeding back to Andreas's question about more pilots, like we cannot build everything all at once. We do need to understand and have intentional pilots. So i.e. what are the critical parts that need to be built now, i.e. a roadmap. And actually, again, to tee up WBCSD at this point, this is elements that they're already working on from a circular data exchange point of view and how circular data needs to be transferred. But this is really going to be aligning across all sectors. So it's not something we can all do straight away, but just to double down on what Luna mentioned, we all need to start, and everyone in the audience as well. Wherever you're working, however you're engaging with this, try to educate yourself on it. Try to understand what are the minimum sets of information that you need to do the operations that will help you create the next stage in a circular data transfer. What is the information I need, why, and when? From all of us on the call, though, I'd just like to say a big thank you. And if there's anyone who does want to reach out to any of us, here are our contact information. And again, just thanks to the team for this this panel. And I hope we've answered the majority of people's questions and or left you with food for thought.
Thank you. Thank you again to all the panelists, and thank you to everyone who's joined in today. As Phil mentioned, our contact information is here. So if you want any more conversations with us, interesting conversations with our panelists, feel free to reach out to us on these email addresses or on LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to engage in a conversation with you. But for now, have a nice day, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.